I sort of like the idea of an employee being treated poorly because I've kind of been in that situation before, not recently, but years ago. And I also like situations where they're just very cringy because somebody is sort of being treated so badly. I love the cringe. Like, if you're familiar with the show The Office, but they're so good at the cringe, and I love it. I'm there for it. So that's kind of what I was going for. It was sort of like this bad boss story about this housemaid being mistreated by her boss. And the question is why? Why is this boss being so awful to her? So, and yeah, it was just one idea I had, and I meant for it to be one book. And then, after it took off, I thought I had an idea for another one, and I thought, okay, now I'll do a second one. And I remember when I gave it to my editor at Bookouture, my publisher, she said, "Oh, and maybe I'll do a third one." And I like laughed. I was like, "No, I won't. That's ridiculous." Millie, is she gets a job working as a housemaid for a rich couple called the Winchesters. And a lot of crazy things happen while she's there. And the ending, it has, I'm very well known for my epilogues, like this extra little twist at the end I always throw in. And the epilogue in this case really kind of opened the door for more. And people kept saying online, "Oh, do you think there'll be another one?" And I love to give people what they want. So I went ahead and wrote it. And there was also a character in the book that people really loved, and they wanted more of that character. I don't want to give this away, but I also wrote it to give people more of that character that they enjoyed so much. I plot out stories in my head. Sometimes I'll see people say online, "Oh, she just came up with this at the last second, this twist." No, I never do that. It's all in my head, and I usually plan it out for a few months before I write even a word. But I don't write anything down. I don't make any flow charts. I don't sketch out scenes or outlines. It's all in my brain. And when I start writing, I'm open to the idea that a character I didn't expect to grab me might grab me, or I'll come up with an idea that like didn't occur to me would be amazing. It's really just as I'm writing, I let it evolve. As somebody who has had, people working for me in the past and has known a lot of people who have employed people in their house, like I wanted it to be different, but also kind of fall back on some of the stories I've heard from people I know. And I didn't want either the housemaid or the couple really to be the intolerable one. I sort of wanted it to be uncertain, like who really is the person who's bad. Like I like to sort of play with people's expectations about that. And I like, the person who you think is the worst, maybe they turn out to be the best, or maybe they turn out to be even worse than you possibly thought. So I just like to play with that expectation. The housemaid is watching. So that one I actually did come up with the title because I saw a lot of books with watching in the title. I'm like, oh, people like to read about watching. So, but yes, again, that was one I did not expect to write. And the idea just hit me. And usually, when you have a series, you try to release them close together. And this one is like over a year after the second one because I absolutely did not plan it. So I did this so badly in terms of like business decisions. But, the idea hit me and I was like, I want to write this. And I didn't want to write it just for the sake of writing it. I didn't want to write it just because it's a franchise and people like it. I wanted to write something that I could be proud of and that would make people feel good about the series. Like I wanted to put a nice bow on it at the end. So it takes place a long time after the first one and a long time after the second one, many years in the future. And Millie, the protagonist, is now married with children. So it's a very different story too. But I think it also brings in a lot of elements that I think people liked about the first two books. So I really kind of wanted it to celebrate the first two books in a way that, I find really satisfying. When I was in high school, there were some scandals at my school that were very memorable at the time. Nobody was arrested, but a lot of teachers were fired. And it really just stuck in my mind because I think there was a lot of bad behavior and people were ignoring it for a long time. Like, oh, we know this teacher does this, but that's just how he is, like there's nothing, anyone ever did about it. And finally, some brave student kind of came forward and, I think she went to a reporter about it and it all came out. And, it just stuck in my mind. And like, that was sort of my inspiration for this. I like to write first person. Almost all of my books are in first person. I just feel really comfortable with it. And I also, I actually dictate a lot of my books, the first draft at least. I do my edits on my laptop, but so it's very conversational. And I think people like that about my writing. That seems very conversational and easily accessible. And I think that's part of why, because I'm literally talking. So it certainly makes first person easier to write. And I also, I have a teenager now. So it's something I feel sort of close to right now, like the way teenagers talk, the way teenagers think. So it was a very comfortable thing for me to write at this time in my life. I'm from New York City, so it's still, even though I live in Boston now, it's still somehow the most comfortable city for me to write about. It's just like my city. I don't know. I don't know why. I can't get away from it. So when I thought about, writing a dating story in a city, it had to be New York because it's just ingrained for me. And even though I'm also married, I have memories of bad dates in the past. And I also have a lot of friends who are single, newly single or less newly single, and they're all going through the online dating stuff. And I live vicariously through them, hearing their stories. So it feels like something, I hear a lot about that I'm very familiar with. So I've always kind of been wanting to write a story like this. I think what's different about The Boyfriend is that you also get the male point of view in that book. And I don't think you see that in a lot of like terrible dating story, especially terrible dating thrillers. So I think it's a little different from the typical one for that reason. And I think it has a good twist, so I hope people like it. He was very fun to write. His point of view actually takes place many years previously, when he was a teenager. So you're kind of reading his narrative from many years ago, and you're not sure if this is a good narrative or a bad narrative or where it's going to go. So I think that's sort of interesting. And Sydney was a little bit more challenging just because you want something I get people complain about is my characters making bad decisions in books. And I own that. My characters make terrible decisions, but sometimes they have to because that's what makes the story interesting. If all I do is like, this doesn't seem right, I'm going to call the police. That's kind of the end of the story a lot of the time. So they have to make a few bad decisions, but I didn't want it to be so over the top that readers are like, oh my God, this person's just too stupid to live. I have to stop reading. So it was that balance that was challenging. It's coming out June 11th. And then The Boyfriend will be October 1st. And my publisher, Poison Pen, and I have arrangement for 3 more books in 2025. So that's no dates are set in stone yet, but we have plans for those. They're already written. I'm very excited to share them.